Maria Santos had always been small for her age. At 23, she stood barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a slender frame that made people assume she was fragile. Working as a night shift security guard at the downtown business district wasn't exactly what her family had envisioned for her future, but Maria took pride in her work. She had studied criminal justice in college, dreaming of becoming a police officer, but her petite stature had become a running joke during her academy training. The other cadets would snicker behind her back, calling her pocket cop and security Barbie. Even the instructors seemed skeptical about her abilities, often pairing her with the largest male cadets during combat training exercises. What they didn't know was that Maria had been secretly training in mixed martial arts since she was 12 years old. Her father, a former boxer from Mexico, had taught her that size meant nothing if you had heart, technique, and the element of surprise. Every morning after her security shift ended, Maria would head straight to Uncle Roberto's gym in the old part of town. The gym was a far cry from the modern fitness centers that dotted the city. It smelled of sweat, determination, and dreams deferred. The walls were covered with faded photographs of local fighters who had made it big, and the heavy bags hung from chains that had seen decades of punishment. Roberto himself was a legend in the neighborhood, having trained 3 professional champions before arthritis forced him to hang up his gloves. Maria's training routine was brutal and unforgiving. She would spend 2 hours working on her footwork, dancing around opponents twice her size with the grace of a ballet dancer and the precision of a surgeon. Her jabs were lightning quick, her combinations fluid and unexpected. Roberto had taught her to use her size as an advantage rather than a limitation. She learned to slip under punches that would have knocked out larger opponents, to move in close where her shorter reach became an asset, and to strike with devastating accuracy at pressure points that could drop a man regardless of his size. The gym regulars had initially been amused by the tiny woman who showed up every day in her security uniform, still smelling faintly of the industrial coffee from her night shift. But as weeks turned into months, their amusement transformed into respect. Maria could hold her own against fighters who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. She had an uncanny ability to read her opponent's movements, anticipating their attacks before they even threw them. Her fellow security guards at work remained oblivious to her training. During their lunch breaks, they would often discuss hypothetical scenarios about what they would do if faced with real danger. Tom, a burly ex-construction worker who served as the head of security, would regale the team with stories of bar fights and street confrontations from his younger days. He would look at Maria with a paternal smile and suggest that if trouble ever arose, she should immediately call for backup and stay out of harm's way. Maria would simply nod and smile, never mentioning the hours she spent perfecting her craft. She had learned early in life that actions spoke louder than words, and she was content to let others underestimate her abilities. Her quiet confidence was often mistaken for shyness or insecurity, which suited her just fine. She understood that being underestimated was perhaps her greatest weapon. The business district where Maria worked was generally peaceful during the night hours. Most of the office buildings housed accounting firms, law offices, and small tech startups that closed by 6 in the evening. Her rounds consisted of checking doors, monitoring security cameras, and ensuring that the parking structures remained safe for the few employees who worked late hours. It was routine work that allowed her mind to wander, often replaying the techniques Roberto had taught her that morning. On weekends, Maria would sometimes compete in local amateur tournaments, though she kept this part of her life separate from her work. She had won several regional competitions, earning small trophies that she kept on a shelf in her modest apartment. Her fighting style was unique and difficult to counter. She combined traditional boxing techniques with elements of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, and street fighting tactics that Roberto had picked up during his own fighting career. Her success in these tournaments had caught the attention of several professional trainers who had approached her about turning pro. But Maria had other plans. Despite the ridicule she had faced at the police academy, she was determined to become a law enforcement officer. She believed that her unique skills could make her an asset to any police force if she could just get the chance to prove herself. The night that would change everything started like any other. Maria arrived at work at 11 p.m., relieving the evening security guard who was eager to get home to his family. The weather was unusually warm for October, and a light rain had begun to fall, creating a misty atmosphere around the tall buildings. She performed her initial rounds, checking each floor of the 3 buildings under her protection, ensuring that all doors were secure and all alarm systems were functioning properly. As she walked through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing softly on the polished floors, Maria felt the familiar sense of alertness that came with the job. She had always taken her responsibilities seriously, understanding that businesses and their employees trusted her to keep their property and workspace safe. It was a responsibility she didn't take lightly, even if others didn't always take her seriously in return. Around 2 a.m., as Maria was reviewing security footage in the main building's lobby, she noticed something unusual on one of the exterior cameras. A group of individuals was gathered near the north parking structure, and their behavior seemed suspicious. They weren't employees working late, as she knew all the regular night shift workers by sight. These were strangers, and they appeared to be casing the area, pointing at various buildings and discussing something with obvious intent. Maria's training kicked in immediately. She reached for her radio to call the police, but discovered that it wasn't working properly. The battery indicator showed full power, but she couldn't raise dispatch no matter how many times she tried different frequencies. Her cell phone showed no signal bars, which was unusual for this location. It was as if someone was deliberately jamming the communications in the area. Through the security monitors, she watched as the group split up, with some individuals moving toward the main building where she was stationed, while others headed toward the adjacent structures. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful, suggesting this wasn't a random occurrence, but a planned operation. Maria realized that she was potentially the only thing standing between these intruders and whatever they were planning to accomplish. Her heart rate increased, but not from fear. Roberto had taught her that adrenaline was a tool to be controlled and channeled, not something to be afraid of. She began mentally preparing herself for what might come next, running through various scenarios and response strategies that she had practiced countless times in the gym. The irony wasn't lost on her that all those people who had laughed at her small stature might soon depend on her ability to protect what they held dear. As she watched the approaching figures through the security cameras, Maria made a decision that would define not only this night but potentially her entire future. She wasn't going to hide and wait for help that might not arrive in time. She wasn't going to abandon her post or hope that the intruders would simply take what they wanted and leave peacefully. Instead, she was going to do exactly what she had been hired to do, regardless of the odds against her. Maria checked her equipment one final time. She had a standard-issue security guard belt with a flashlight, pepper spray, handcuffs, and a radio that apparently wasn't working. She wasn't armed with anything more substantial, as the security company's policy prohibited weapons for their guards. But she had something that couldn't be issued or purchased: years of training, an intimate knowledge of these buildings, and a determination that had been forged through countless hours of preparation for exactly this type of situation. The first group of intruders reached the main entrance of her building. Through the glass doors, she could see that there were 5 of them, all men, all significantly larger than her. They were dressed in dark clothing and appeared to be in good physical condition. One of them produced what looked like electronic equipment designed to bypass the building's security system. They worked with the efficiency of professionals, suggesting this wasn't their first operation of this type. Maria turned off the lights in the lobby, plunging the area into darkness except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. She used her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to position herself advantageously, finding a spot where she could observe the intruders without being easily detected. Her breathing became controlled and rhythmic, exactly as Roberto had taught her before every sparring session. As the electronic lock on the main door clicked open, and the first intruder stepped inside, Maria realized that everything she had trained for, everything she had endured in terms of ridicule and skepticism, had been leading to this moment. The tiny security guard who had been dismissed and underestimated by so many people was about to face the ultimate test of her abilities and determination. The rain continued to fall outside, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what was about to unfold. In a few minutes, 5 experienced criminals would learn what Uncle Roberto had taught Maria years ago: that in a real fight, heart and skill mattered more than size and assumptions. They were about to discover that their biggest mistake wasn't breaking into the building, it was underestimating the small woman who stood between them and their objectives. As the intruders spread out through the lobby, beginning their systematic search of the building, Maria took a deep breath and prepared to show them exactly what kind of security guard they were dealing with. The people who had laughed at her weren't here to witness what was about to happen, but by morning, her actions would speak louder than any words ever could. The night was young, and Maria Santos was ready to prove that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming. The 5 intruders moved through the darkened lobby with the confidence of men who had done this before. Their leader, a tall man with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos, gestured silently to his team, directing them to different areas of the building. They communicated through hand signals, suggesting military or law enforcement backgrounds. These weren't common thieves looking for quick cash. They were professionals with a specific agenda. Maria remained hidden in the shadows behind the reception desk, watching their every movement through the reflection in the polished marble floors. She had memorized their positions and movement patterns within the first 30 seconds of their entry. The leader stayed near the elevators while 2 men headed toward the stairwell on the east side. The 4th man moved toward the building directory, apparently searching for specific office locations, while the 5th began examining the security station where Maria normally would have been seated. From her vantage point, Maria could see that they were looking for something specific rather than conducting a random burglary. The man at the directory was photographing certain listings with his phone, focusing on the upper floors where the most valuable law firms and financial companies had their offices. This wasn't about grabbing computers or petty cash. They were after sensitive information, documents, or access to accounts that could be worth millions. The security station held their attention longer than Maria had expected. One of the intruders produced a small device that he connected to the main computer system. Within moments, he was downloading security protocols, camera feeds, and building schematics. They were systematically dismantling the very systems that were supposed to keep the building safe, turning her own equipment against her. Maria knew she had to act soon. Every minute she waited, the intruders were gaining more control over the situation and gathering intelligence that would make them harder to stop. But Roberto's training had taught her patience and timing. In the gym, she had learned to wait for the perfect moment to strike, when her opponent was most vulnerable and least expecting an attack. The moment came when the leader made his first tactical error. He sent 2 of his men to the upper floors via the stairwell while keeping 3 on the ground level. This split his forces and left him with fewer numbers to control the main entry points. More importantly, it meant that Maria would only have to deal with 3 opponents initially, which significantly improved her odds. She waited until the 2 men disappeared into the stairwell, their footsteps echoing as they climbed toward the upper floors. The remaining 3 were spread out across the lobby area, with the leader near the elevators, 1 man still working at the security station, and the 3rd examining the building directory. They were far enough apart that she could potentially engage them one at a time if she moved quickly and efficiently. Maria's first target was the man at the security station. He was isolated from the others and focused intently on the computer screen, making him vulnerable to a surprise attack. She moved silently across the marble floor, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound as she approached from behind. Years of training had taught her how to move like a shadow, closing distance without alerting her target. When she was 3 feet away, the man finally sensed her presence. He began to turn, his hand reaching for something under his jacket. But Maria was already in motion. She grabbed his wrist with both hands, using his own momentum against him as she stepped to the side and twisted the joint lock. Was one of Roberto's favorites, designed to control an opponent while causing enough pain to discourage resistance. The man gasped in surprise and pain, dropping the electronic device he had been using to hack the security system. Maria quickly followed up with a precise strike to a pressure point on his neck, a technique that would render him unconscious for several minutes without causing permanent damage. He slumped forward onto the desk, out of the fight before he could call out to alert his companions. The leader had heard the brief scuffle and was already moving toward the security station when Maria emerged from behind the desk. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw the small security guard instead of his team member. For a split second, he hesitated, clearly not considering her a serious threat. That moment of underestimation was exactly what Maria had been counting on. "Where's Jenkins?" the leader demanded, his voice low but carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. He was still approaching, but his pace had slowed as he tried to process what he was seeing. His hand moved toward his waistband, where Maria could see the outline of a concealed weapon. "He's taking a break," Maria replied calmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She positioned herself so that the security desk was between her and the leader, using the furniture as both cover and a potential weapon. "You gentlemen are trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The leader actually laughed, a sound that echoed harshly in the empty lobby. "Lady, you have no idea what you've walked into. This is way above your pay grade. Just walk away and nobody gets hurt." He was still moving closer, now only about 15 feet away. His confidence was evident in his posture and tone, the attitude of a man who had never been challenged by someone like Maria. The third intruder, who had been at the building directory, was now moving to flank her from the left side. Maria tracked his movement in her peripheral vision while keeping her primary focus on the leader. She was now facing two opponents simultaneously, but the confined space of the lobby actually worked to her advantage. In a narrow area, numerical superiority mattered less than positioning and technique. "I can't do that," Maria said, shifting her weight slightly as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. "This is my building, these are my people's offices, and you're not welcome here." Her voice carried a quiet determination that seemed to surprise both men. They had expected fear, pleading, or immediate surrender. Instead, they were facing someone who seemed genuinely prepared to fight. The leader pulled his weapon, a compact pistol that he held with obvious familiarity. "Listen, security girl, I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you don't step aside. We're here for business, not violence. Make this easy on everyone." The gun was pointed in her direction, but not directly at her, suggesting he was still hoping to intimidate rather than shoot. Maria's training had included scenarios involving armed opponents. Roberto had taught her that a gun was a tool, not magic, and like any tool, it had limitations and vulnerabilities. The key was to control distance, timing, and the opponent's ability to aim effectively. In close quarters, a trained fighter could neutralize an armed opponent if they moved correctly and quickly. "You know," Maria said conversationally, taking a small step to her left, "people have been underestimating me my whole life. My academy instructors, my co-workers, pretty much everyone I meet." She was moving gradually, making her adjustments seem casual rather than tactical. "It used to bother me, but I've learned to appreciate it." The leader was becoming impatient with the conversation. "Look, I admire your dedication, but this isn't some movie. You're one small woman against trained professionals. Be smart about this." He gestured with the gun, emphasizing his point, but Maria noticed that his grip had relaxed slightly as he talked. "You're right," Maria agreed, nodding as if she was considering his words. "This isn't a movie. In movies, the bad guys always explain their plans and give the hero time to figure out how to stop them." She paused, her muscles coiling like springs. "In real life, the person who moves first usually wins. What happened next took less than 3 seconds but would replay in the security cameras in slow motion." Maria exploded into motion, diving forward and to her right, using the reception desk as cover as the leader instinctively pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, the bullet embedding itself in the wall where she had been standing just moments before. She rolled behind the desk as the second intruder rushed toward her position. Coming up in a crouch, Maria grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the desk surface and hurled it with deadly accuracy. The makeshift projectile struck the flanking attacker in the solar plexus, doubling him over and sending him stumbling backward into a decorative plant stand. The leader was trying to reacquire his target when Maria vaulted over the reception desk with the fluid grace of a gymnast. She landed within arm's reach of him, inside the effective range of his weapon. Before he could adjust his aim, she grabbed his gun hand with both of hers, controlling the weapon while simultaneously delivering a devastating knee strike to his ribs. The impact drove the air from his lungs and caused him to reflexively tighten his grip on the pistol. But Maria had anticipated this reaction. She used his own strength against him, twisting his wrist at an unnatural angle while pushing the gun upward. The combined pressure forced him to release the weapon, which clattered across the marble floor and came to rest near the elevator bank. With the immediate threat of the gun neutralized, Maria shifted her focus to ending the fight quickly. The leader was still gasping for breath from her knee strike, giving her a brief window of opportunity. She struck twice in rapid succession, a precise jab to his throat that temporarily paralyzed his vocal cords, followed by a palm strike to the side of his head that scrambled his equilibrium. The leader staggered sideways, his legs no longer properly supporting his weight. Maria helped him along with a perfectly executed hip throw that sent his much larger frame crashing into the marble floor. The impact knocked him unconscious, his head making a hollow thudding sound as it hit the polished stone. The second attacker had recovered from the paperweight strike and was now charging toward her with a knife drawn from his boot. Maria had been expecting this escalation and was already moving to counter it. She sidestepped his initial lunge, grabbed his extended arm, and used his forward momentum to redirect him face first into the security desk. The collision was spectacular and decisive. The man's nose exploded in a shower of blood as his face met the solid oak surface. The knife flew from his nerveless fingers, spinning across the floor as he collapsed in a groaning heap. Maria quickly secured the weapon, adding it to the gun she retrieved from near the elevators. In less than 2 minutes, she had neutralized 3 trained criminals without suffering a scratch herself. The lobby looked like a war zone, with unconscious bodies, scattered equipment, and broken furniture marking the sites of brief but intense confrontations. But Maria's work wasn't finished. 2 more intruders were still somewhere in the building, and they had undoubtedly heard the gunshot. She quickly secured the 3 unconscious men using zip-tie restraints from her security belt, then collected their weapons and electronic equipment. The device one of them had been using to hack the security system was still connected to the main computer, allowing Maria to see what information they had accessed. The data theft was more extensive than she had realized. They had downloaded employee records, security protocols, and financial information from multiple companies in the building. As she studied the downloaded files, Maria realized this wasn't a simple burglary or even corporate espionage. The information they had stolen could be used for identity theft, financial fraud, or worse. These men weren't just criminals. They were part of a larger operation that could affect hundreds of innocent people. The stakes were higher than she had initially understood. Heavy footsteps echoed from the stairwell as the 2 remaining intruders made their way back down from the upper floors. They had obviously heard the commotion and were coming to investigate. Maria quickly assessed her situation and options. She now had 2 firearms and a knife, along with the element of surprise. The approaching men didn't yet know that their teammates had been defeated, but Maria also knew that the next phase of the confrontation would be different. The remaining intruders would be more cautious, better prepared, and potentially more dangerous once they realized what had happened to their colleagues. She had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The sound of footsteps grew closer as the 2 men descended the stairwell. Maria positioned herself behind a marble pillar near the elevator bank, giving her cover while maintaining a clear view of the stairwell exit. In a few moments, she would once again be outnumbered by professional criminals, who now had every reason to consider her a serious threat. As she waited in the shadows, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed in the past few minutes. Less than half an hour ago, she had been just another underestimated security guard making her rounds. Now, she was the only thing standing between dangerous criminals and their escape, holding evidence of a crime that could affect hundreds of innocent victims. The irony wasn't lost on her. All those people who had laughed at her size and questioned her abilities weren't here to see her in action. But by the time this night was over, there would be no doubt about what Maria Santos was capable of accomplishing. The real test, however, was still to come. The footsteps from the stairwell stopped abruptly, followed by an eerie silence that stretched across the lobby like a taut wire. Maria knew that the remaining 2 intruders had reached the ground floor and were now assessing the scene that greeted them. Their 3 unconscious teammates lay sprawled across the marble floor, zip-tied and stripped of their weapons, while the lobby bore clear evidence of a violent confrontation. From her position behind the marble pillar, Maria could hear whispered conversation as the 2 men tried to make sense of what had happened. Their voices carried a note of disbelief and growing concern. These were professionals who had planned this operation carefully, and the sight of their defeated colleagues was clearly not part of their expected scenario. "This doesn't make sense," she heard one of them whisper urgently. Marcus said there was only 1 guard, a small woman. How could she take down 3 guys? The voice belonged to someone who was struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he believed to be possible. The second voice was calmer but carried an underlying tension that suggested its owner was rapidly reassessing the situation. "We need to find her and finish this. The operation is blown if we don't get that data and get out of here." This man was clearly the more experienced of the 2. Someone who had dealt with unexpected complications before. Maria listened carefully to their conversation, gathering intelligence about their intentions and capabilities. They were primarily concerned with escaping with the stolen data, rather than revenge against her, which suggested they were professionals rather than thugs. This was both good and bad news. Professionals might be more predictable, but they were also more dangerous and better trained. She could hear them moving carefully through the lobby, checking their fallen teammates and retrieving scattered equipment. One of them was attempting to revive the unconscious leader, while the other was examining the security station to determine what information had been compromised. Their methodical approach suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds, confirming Maria's initial assessment. "Marcus is out cold, and it looks like they got all our gear," the first voice reported with obvious frustration. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. This wasn't luck. The admission that they were facing a skilled opponent rather than a fortunate civilian marked a significant shift in their approach to the situation. The second man's response was immediate and decisive. "Then we treat this like a hostile engagement. Standard search and eliminate protocol. She's somewhere in this building, and we have the advantage of superior numbers and firepower." The casual mention of elimination sent a chill down Maria's spine, but also steeled her resolve. These weren't just thieves anymore. They were killers. From her concealed position, Maria could see one of the men clearly as he moved through the lobby. He was tall and lean, with the careful, economical movements of someone with extensive combat training. A military-style haircut and numerous scars visible on his exposed arms suggested a background in special forces or private military contracting. This was not going to be like dealing with the first three intruders. The second man remained partially hidden behind an overturned desk, but Maria could see that he was systematically searching the area with the practiced eye of someone trained in urban warfare tactics. He moved in short, controlled bursts from cover to cover, never exposing himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Both men were armed with compact submachine guns that they handled with obvious familiarity. Maria realized that her situation had fundamentally changed. The first confrontation had been against criminals who underestimated her but weren't necessarily prepared for a real fight. These two remaining intruders were treating her as a legitimate threat and responding with appropriate tactics. Her advantages of surprise and superior positioning were rapidly diminishing. The men had established a basic perimeter around the lobby and were beginning to expand their search pattern systematically. One would provide overwatch while the other advanced. Then they would switch roles. It was textbook small unit tactics, the kind of coordination that came from extensive training and real combat experience. Maria knew she couldn't simply wait for them to find her. She needed to regain the initiative. Roberto had taught her that in any fight, controlling the pace and location of engagement was crucial. The lobby gave her opponents too much space to use their superior firepower and training effectively. She needed to draw them into a more confined area where her advantages in speed and agility would be more pronounced. The building's layout provided several opportunities for this if she could reach them without being detected. The maintenance corridors that ran behind the main offices were narrow and poorly lit, perfect for someone who knew the building intimately. There were also several choke points where the hallways narrowed or turned sharply, locations where she could potentially isolate one opponent from the other. But reaching these areas required crossing open space while avoiding two trained killers who were actively hunting her. Maria began to move carefully along the wall, using the marble pillars and reception furniture as cover. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and exposure, drawing on techniques Roberto had taught her about moving in hostile territory. She had practiced similar exercises in the gym, but the stakes had never been this real or this deadly. As she moved, she could hear the two men communicating through subtle hand signals and brief whispered commands. Their search was methodical and professional, gradually closing off her escape routes and forcing her toward the building's interior. They were herding her like experienced hunters, cutting off options until she would be forced into the open. But Maria had an advantage they couldn't account for: her intimate knowledge of every inch of this building. She knew about the service elevator that connected to the parking garage, the emergency exits that weren't visible on standard floor plans, and the maintenance areas that provided alternative routes between floors. Most importantly, she knew about the building's automated systems and how they could be used tactically. The first opportunity came when one of the intruders moved past the main electrical panel while searching the east side of the lobby. Maria had memorized the location of every switch and circuit breaker during her orientation training, knowledge that had seemed trivial at the time, but now provided a crucial advantage. If she could reach the panel without being detected, she could plunge the entire building into darkness. Fighting in complete darkness would neutralize the intruders' weapons advantages and force them to rely on the same close-quarters skills where Maria excelled. More importantly, it would create confusion and uncertainty, psychological weapons that could be just as effective as physical ones. Roberto had always emphasized that winning a fight was as much about controlling your opponent's mind as their body. The approach to the electrical panel required crossing 15 feet of open space, a distance that would leave her exposed for several crucial seconds. But the positioning of the two intruders created a brief window when both would be looking away from her location. It was risky, but every option available to her now carried significant danger. Maria waited until both men were focused on searching the opposite side of the lobby, then moved with the fluid speed that had made her so effective in competition fighting. She crossed the open space in 3 quick strides, her footsteps silent on the marble floor, and reached the electrical panel just as one of the intruders began to turn in her direction. Her hand found the main breaker switch just as the searching man spotted her movement. "Contact!" he shouted, raising his weapon as Maria threw the switch. The lobby plunged into absolute darkness as every light in the building went out simultaneously. The backup emergency lighting would take 30 seconds to activate, giving her a crucial window of opportunity. The sudden darkness caused immediate confusion among the two intruders. She could hear them calling out to each other, trying to re-establish communication and visual contact, while dealing with the disorientation of complete sensory deprivation. Their night vision would require several minutes to adjust, while Maria's familiarity with the building layout allowed her to move confidently, even in total darkness. She used the confusion to change her position, moving away from the electrical panel toward the stairwell access. The intruders were firing blindly in the direction where they had last seen her, their muzzle flashes providing brief illuminations that actually worked against them by destroying their adapting night vision. The sound of gunfire in the enclosed space was deafening, adding auditory confusion to their visual impairment. Maria reached the stairwell door just as the emergency lighting began to flicker on, casting eerie red shadows throughout the lobby. The dim illumination provided just enough light to move safely, but was insufficient for accurate shooting at any distance. It was the perfect environment for close-quarters combat, exactly what she had been hoping to achieve. The two intruders had regrouped near the center of the lobby, standing back-to-back to cover all approaches. Their positioning showed professional training, but it also made them predictable. Maria knew that they would expect her to attack from ground level, so she decided to use the building's vertical space to her advantage. The stairwell provided access to a maintenance catwalk that ran around the lobby's second-story level, originally designed to service the building's lighting and ventilation systems. From there, she could observe the intruders' movements and potentially attack from an unexpected angle. It was a risky plan that required perfect timing and execution, but it offered her best chance of evening the odds. As she climbed silently toward the catwalk, Maria could hear the two men below calling out challenges and threats, trying to provoke her into revealing her position. Their voices carried notes of frustration and growing concern as they realized that their tactical situation had deteriorated significantly. The hunter was rapidly becoming the hunted. "We know you're still here," one of them shouted into the red-tinged darkness. "This building is surrounded. You've got nowhere to go. Make this easy on yourself and come out with your hands visible." The bluff was obvious. If they had backup outside, they wouldn't need to negotiate with a single security guard. Maria reached the catwalk and began moving carefully along its length, observing the lobby below through the decorative metalwork that concealed her presence. The two intruders were positioned perfectly for what she had in mind. Their back-to-back stance gave them 360-degree coverage, but also meant that neither could assist the other if attacked simultaneously. The building's ventilation system provided the final element of her plan. Large air conditioning units mounted near the ceiling could be accessed from the catwalk, and their external panels were held in place by simple thumb screws. If she could remove one of the panels quietly, it would create a makeshift projectile weapon that could incapacitate one opponent while allowing her to engage the other at close range. Working quickly but quietly, Maria loosened the screws holding a large metal panel in place. The piece weighed approximately 20 pounds and had sharp edges that would make it particularly effective when dropped from a height. More importantly, the sound of the impact would mask her descent from the catwalk, allowing her to reach ground level before the remaining intruder could react. Everything depended on timing and precision. Maria positioned herself directly above one of the intruders, the panel ready to drop, while calculating the distance and angle needed to reach the second man before he could bring his weapon to bear. It was a complex sequence that required split-second coordination, but Roberto had trained her for exactly this type of multi-phase engagement. The moment arrived when both intruders were looking away from her position, searching the building's perimeter for signs of movement. Maria released the panel and immediately began her descent, using a combination of controlled falling and calculated jumps to reach ground level. The panel struck its target with devastating effect, while Maria landed behind the second intruder just as he spun toward the sound. What followed was the most intense 30 seconds of combat in Maria's life, a blur of movement, violence, and split-second decisions that would determine whether she survived the night. The training that everyone had dismissed as inadequate for a real police officer was about to prove its worth in the most dramatic way possible. By the time the emergency lights stopped flickering and stabilized, the lobby contained 5 unconscious intruders and 1 very small security guard, who had just redefined what it meant to protect and serve. But Maria's victory came with the knowledge that this was likely just the beginning of a much larger confrontation. The falling metal panel struck the first intruder squarely between the shoulder blades, sending him crashing face first into the marble floor with tremendous force. The impact was so violent that his submachine gun skittered across the polished surface and came to rest against the far wall, completely out of reach. He lay motionless, either unconscious or seriously injured, eliminating him as an immediate threat. The second intruder spun toward the sound just as Maria landed behind him, her feet touching the ground with the silent grace of a cat. Before he could fully turn to face her, she was already inside his weapon's effective range, too close for him to bring the submachine gun to bear without risking shooting himself. Roberto's training had emphasized this principle repeatedly. Get inside your opponent's reach and their size advantage becomes irrelevant. The intruder tried to create distance by stepping backward while bringing his weapon up, but Maria anticipated the movement and stayed with him like a shadow. She grabbed the barrel of the submachine gun with both hands, pushing it upward while simultaneously driving her knee into his solar plexus with enough force to double him over. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling, sending chunks of plaster raining down on both combatants. Using the intruder's forward momentum from the knee strike, Maria executed a perfect hip toss that sent his much larger frame spinning through the air before crashing into a decorative marble table. The impact shattered the table and left the man sprawled among the debris, groaning but clearly defeated. His weapon lay several feet away, and he showed no inclination to continue fighting. Maria quickly secured all 5 intruders with additional zip ties, creating what looked like the aftermath of a small war in the elegant lobby. Broken furniture, scattered weapons, and unconscious criminals painted a scene that would have been unbelievable just an hour earlier. The tiny security guard, who everyone had underestimated, had single-handedly defeated 5 trained professionals. But even as she caught her breath and assessed the situation, Maria knew that her challenges were far from over. The stolen data was still on the hacker's equipment, and she had no way of knowing if there were additional team members waiting outside the building. More importantly, she needed to contact law enforcement and report what had happened, assuming she could get her communications equipment working properly. Her radio remained stubbornly silent despite multiple attempts to raise dispatch on various frequencies. The cell phone jamming that had affected her earlier appeared to be ongoing, suggesting that the intruders had sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. Maria realized that she might need to physically leave the building to summon help, which could potentially allow any remaining criminals to escape with their stolen information. The solution came from an unexpected source. The building's landline telephone system operated independently of radio and cellular networks, providing a hardwired connection that couldn't be jammed electronically. Maria located the main phone at the reception desk and was relieved to hear a dial tone when she picked up the handset. Within moments, she was connected to 911 dispatch and reporting the situation. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm, professional voice was a welcome sound after the chaos of the past hour. "This is Maria Santos, security officer at the Meridian Business Complex on 5th Street. I have 5 suspects in custody following an attempted burglary and data theft. I need police and paramedic response immediately." Maria kept her voice steady and professional, providing the essential information without unnecessary details. The dispatcher's tone sharpened with interest and concern. "Did you say you have 5 suspects in custody? Are you injured? Is backup en route?" "Negative on injuries, and I'm the only security officer on duty. The suspects are restrained and unconscious. They were attempting to steal computer data from multiple businesses in the building." Maria could hear the dispatcher typing rapidly, presumably entering the information into the emergency response system. "Units are dispatched and en route. Estimated arrival time is 6 minutes. Are the suspects armed?" The dispatcher was following standard protocol, gathering information that would help responding officers assess the tactical situation upon arrival. They were armed with handguns and submachine guns, but all weapons have been secured and are no longer accessible to the suspects. Maria glanced around the lobby, mentally cataloging the weapons she had collected. "I also have electronic equipment that was used to hack building security systems." The dispatcher paused for a moment, clearly processing the unusual nature of the call. "Ma'am, can you confirm that you're a single security officer who detained 5 armed suspects?" There was obvious skepticism in the voice, suggesting that the scenario seemed unlikely even to experienced emergency services personnel. "That's correct. I have law enforcement training and was able to use the building's layout to my advantage." Maria didn't elaborate on her martial arts background, knowing that such details could wait for the responding officers. "The suspects will require medical evaluation, but none appear to have life-threatening injuries." The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of sirens approaching the building. The first responding units were making good time, which Maria attributed to the late hour and light traffic in the business district. She could see flashing lights reflecting off the windows of adjacent buildings as multiple patrol cars converged on her location. "Officers are arriving on scene," Maria reported to the dispatcher. "I'm going to end this call and provide them with a briefing." She hung up the phone and moved toward the main entrance, ensuring that her hands were clearly visible and her body language non-threatening. Police responding to a situation involving multiple armed suspects would be on high alert. The first patrol car pulled up directly in front of the building, followed quickly by 2 others. Maria could see that the officers were taking defensive positions behind their vehicles, treating the scene as a potentially active threat situation until they could assess the actual circumstances. She activated the building's exterior lighting to improve visibility and reduce the chances of any misunderstandings. A powerful voice called out through a megaphone, "Security officer, we need you to exit the building slowly with your hands visible. Move to the center of the parking area and await further instructions." The tone was authoritative but not hostile, suggesting that the responding officers were prepared for multiple scenarios. Maria complied immediately, opening the main door and stepping outside with her hands raised above her head. The cool night air felt refreshing after the intensity of the confrontations inside, and the presence of law enforcement represented the first moment since the intrusion began that she felt truly safe. The ordeal was finally coming to an end. As she walked slowly toward the designated area, Maria could see that additional units were still arriving. What had started as a simple burglary call had apparently escalated into a major incident response, complete with supervisory personnel and specialized units. The flashing lights and radio chatter created an atmosphere of controlled urgency that she found oddly comforting. "Stop right there and keep your hands visible," commanded a sergeant who appeared to be the senior officer on scene. He was a tall man with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone with extensive experience in handling unusual situations. "Are you Maria Santos, the reporting party?" "Yes, sir. I'm the security officer who called 911. All 5 suspects are secured inside the building, along with their weapons and the equipment they used for the data theft." Maria kept her voice calm and professional, knowing that cooperation and clear communication would help the officers understand the situation quickly. The sergeant studied her carefully, clearly trying to reconcile her small stature with the report of 5 detained armed suspects. "Ma'am, before we proceed, I need to ask, are you injured in any way?" Do you require medical attention? His tone suggested genuine concern rather than skepticism, which Maria found encouraging. No injuries, sir. I was able to avoid any serious physical contact during the confrontations. It wasn't entirely accurate, but Maria knew that minor bruises and scrapes didn't constitute injuries requiring immediate medical attention. The suspects may need medical evaluation, particularly the one who was struck by falling debris. The sergeant nodded and began organizing his response team. Maria watched as officers prepared to enter the building, their movements coordinated and professional. These were experienced law enforcement personnel who understood both the tactical requirements and the investigative aspects of the situation she had created. We're going to need a detailed statement from you about what happened, but first we need to secure the scene and ensure that all suspects are properly detained. The sergeant's manner was businesslike but not unfriendly. You'll be riding with one of my officers to provide guidance about the building layout and suspect locations. As the entry team prepared to move into the building, Maria noticed several additional vehicles arriving at the scene. Detective units, crime scene technicians, and what appeared to be federal agents were setting up a command post in the parking area. The scope of the response suggested that her actions had uncovered something much larger than a simple commercial burglary. The entry into the building proceeded smoothly, with Maria providing detailed information about suspect locations and weapon positions. The officers were clearly impressed by the thoroughness of her security procedures and the condition in which she had left the scene. Every weapon was properly secured, all suspects were safely restrained, and the evidence of the computer intrusion was preserved and ready for analysis. As paramedics examined the 5 unconscious intruders, Maria overheard conversations between the detectives that suggested the captured equipment contained evidence of a much larger criminal enterprise. The stolen data included information from multiple businesses, and the sophisticated nature of the hacking equipment indicated connections to organized crime or foreign intelligence operations. Detective Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached Maria as the initial scene processing was winding down. Chen was a compact woman in her 40s, with alert eyes and an air of competent authority. She had been observing the scene carefully and taking extensive notes about the aftermath of Maria's confrontations with the intruders. Miss Santos, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you accomplished tonight. Chen's tone was respectful and genuinely impressed. Those 5 men have extensive criminal records and suspected ties to international cybercrime organizations. Taking them down single-handedly is remarkable by any standard. Maria felt a flush of pride at the detective's words, but she remained focused on the professional aspects of the situation. I was just doing my job, detective. This building and the people who work here were depending on me to keep their property and information safe. She paused, then added, I'm also curious about the scope of what they were trying to steal. Detective Chen nodded grimly. Based on our preliminary examination of their equipment, they were conducting industrial espionage on a massive scale. The stolen data could have been sold to competitors or foreign governments for millions of dollars. Your actions tonight prevented a significant breach of national economic security. The investigation continued for several more hours, with Maria providing detailed statements to multiple agencies. FBI cybercrime specialists analyzed the captured equipment while local detectives processed the physical evidence from the confrontations. Maria's security footage provided additional confirmation of the sequence of events and the professional nature of the criminal operation. As dawn began to break over the city, Maria finally found herself sitting in Detective Chen's office, completing the final paperwork related to the incident. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving her exhausted but deeply satisfied with the night's work. She had done exactly what she had trained for, and the results spoke for themselves. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Detective Chen said as they finished the official statement. This incident is going to receive significant media attention, and your actions are likely to be recognized at the highest levels of law enforcement. Have you given any thought to what you want to do next? Maria looked up from the papers she was signing, curious about the direction of the conversation. What do you mean, Detective? Chen smiled slightly. I mean that someone with your skills and instincts belongs in law enforcement, not working security for minimum wage. Several agencies are going to want to recruit you based on what happened tonight. She leaned back in her chair. The question is whether you're interested in turning this into a career opportunity. For the first time since the ordeal began, Maria allowed herself to think about the future rather than just surviving the present. The people who had laughed at her size and questioned her abilities weren't laughing anymore. In fact, they were about to discover that the tiny security guard they had dismissed was being courted by some of the most prestigious law enforcement agencies in the country. The night that had started with ridicule and doubt was ending with respect and opportunity. Maria Santos had proven that courage, skill, and determination mattered more than size or assumptions. Now she had to decide how to use the reputation she had earned in the space of a few extraordinary hours. The morning news cycles picked up the story with the intensity of a wildfire spreading through dry grassland. By 8 a.m., every major television network was running footage of the crime scene, showing 5 handcuffed suspects being loaded into police vehicles while reporters tried to piece together the extraordinary events that had unfolded overnight. The headline that dominated every broadcast was simple but powerful: Security guard defeats 5 armed criminals in downtown data theft. Maria had returned to her small apartment just as the story was breaking, exhausted but unable to sleep as her phone began ringing with calls from reporters, television producers, and law enforcement agencies. She had unplugged the landline and turned off her cell phone, seeking a few hours of quiet to process what had happened and what it might mean for her future. The knock on her door came at 10 a.m., gentle but persistent. Through the peephole, Maria could see Detective Chen standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a newspaper and wearing an expression that mixed amusement with professional concern. Maria opened the door, curious about what had brought the detective to her apartment so soon after the incident. "I thought you might want to see how the media is covering your story," Chen said, offering the newspaper. "And I wanted to discuss some developments that have occurred since you left the station." She paused, studying Maria's face. "You look like you haven't slept. Are you doing all right after everything that happened?" Maria invited the detective inside, grateful for the company and curious about the developments she had mentioned. Her apartment was modest but comfortable, decorated with her martial arts trophies and photographs from various competitions. Chen noticed the display immediately, her eyebrows raising as she took in the evidence of Maria's extensive fighting background. "Now the whole thing makes more sense," Chen observed, examining a trophy from the state championship tournament. "You're not just someone who got lucky last night. You're a serious competitive fighter." She turned to face Maria directly. "Why didn't you mention this during your statement?" Maria shrugged, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of coffee that had grown cold while she tried to process the morning's events. "You didn't ask about my hobbies, and I figured it wasn't relevant to the investigation. I did what anyone in my position would have done." She gestured toward the newspaper Chen had brought. "What are they saying about what happened?" Chen opened the paper to reveal a front-page story with multiple photographs, including one of Maria being escorted from the building by police officers. The headline read, "David and Goliath: How One Woman Brought Down an International Crime Ring." The accompanying article described the incident in dramatic terms, with quotes from law enforcement officials praising Maria's actions and experts analyzing the significance of the criminal operation she had disrupted. "The story is getting national attention," Chen explained. "The data those criminals stole would have compromised dozens of companies and potentially thousands of individual victims. You didn't just stop a burglary. You prevented what could have been one of the largest corporate espionage cases in recent history." She paused to let the implications sink in. "The FBI is calling it a significant victory against international cybercrime." Maria read through the article with growing amazement. The 5 suspects were identified as members of a sophisticated criminal organization with connections to multiple countries. The equipment they had been using was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and represented state-of-the-art technology for electronic surveillance and data theft. Her actions had not only protected the businesses in her building, but had also disrupted a much larger criminal enterprise. "There's something else," Chen continued, settling into the chair across from Maria. 3 different federal agencies contacted our department this morning, asking for your complete file and requesting meetings with you. The Secret Service, FBI, and U.S. Marshal Service are all interested in discussing potential career opportunities. She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Maria, you've caught the attention of people at the highest levels of law enforcement. The magnitude of the attention was overwhelming for someone who had started the previous evening as just another security guard working the night shift. Maria had always dreamed of a career in law enforcement, but she had never imagined that it might come about as a result of a single dramatic incident. The recognition was gratifying, but it also brought pressure and expectations that she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. Chen seemed to understand her uncertainty. You don't have to make any decisions immediately. Take some time to think about what you want, and don't let anyone pressure you into commitments you're not comfortable with. She handed Maria a business card. But I will say this, opportunities like this don't come along very often, and you've earned every bit of the attention you're receiving. The detective's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. As Chen took the call, Maria could hear excited voices on the other end, discussing media interviews and official recognition ceremonies. The story was clearly continuing to grow, and her role in it was becoming more prominent with each passing hour. "That was my captain," Chen said after ending the call. "The mayor wants to present you with a civilian commendation at a press conference this afternoon. The police commissioner will be there along with federal officials." She looked at Maria carefully. "Are you ready for that level of public attention?" Maria considered the question seriously. She had always been a private person who preferred actions to words, but she understood that accepting public recognition came with responsibilities. Young women who might be discouraged from pursuing law enforcement careers needed to see that size and gender were not insurmountable obstacles. Her story could inspire others who had faced similar skepticism and discrimination. "I'll do it," Maria decided. "But I want to make sure the focus stays on the importance of proper training and preparation, not just on the dramatic aspects of what happened." She gestured toward her trophy collection. "People need to understand that this wasn't some miraculous event. It was the result of years of hard work and dedication." The press conference that afternoon was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. The police department's media room was packed with reporters, cameras, and officials from multiple agencies. Mayor Patricia Williams personally presented Maria with the city's highest civilian honor, while Police Commissioner Robert Hayes described her actions as exemplary service that reflects the finest traditions of public safety. The questions from reporters were intense and wide-ranging, covering everything from her martial arts background to her future plans. Maria handled them with the same calm professionalism she had displayed during the incident itself, emphasizing the importance of training and preparation while deflecting attempts to sensationalize the story. "Ms. Santos," asked a reporter from the National News Network, "you've been called a hero for what you did last night. How does it feel to go from being an overlooked security guard to someone being recruited by federal law enforcement agencies?" Maria paused thoughtfully before answering. "I think the word hero gets used too easily sometimes. I was just a person doing her job, using skills that I've spent years developing." She looked directly into the camera. "What I hope people take from this story is that preparation and dedication matter more than what others think about your limitations." Another reporter pressed for more details about her future plans. "Have you decided which agency you might want to work with, or whether you'll continue in private security?" The question represented the culmination of everything that had changed in Maria's life over the past 24 hours. "I've always wanted to serve in law enforcement," Maria replied honestly. "The events of last night have opened doors that I thought might be closed to me permanently. I'm going to carefully consider my options and choose the path that allows me to make the greatest contribution to public safety." She smiled slightly. "But I can promise that wherever I end up, I'll be ready for whatever challenges come my way." The weeks that followed brought a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and opportunities. The FBI offered her a position in their cybercrime division, capitalizing on her demonstrated ability to handle complex technical investigations. The Secret Service was interested in her skills for protective details, while the U.S. Marshals Service saw potential in her abilities for fugitive apprehension operations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The police academy, that had originally questioned her suitability for law enforcement, issued a formal apology and invited her to serve as a guest instructor for defensive tactics training. The same people who had once laughed at her size were now asking her to teach their techniques to new recruits. Maria's decision, when it finally came, surprised many people. Rather than accepting one of the prestigious federal positions, she chose to join the local police department as a patrol officer. Her reasoning was simple but profound. She wanted to work in the community where she had grown up, protecting the same neighborhoods and people who had shaped her character. Detective Chen, who had become both a mentor and friend, supported the decision completely. "You could have gone anywhere and done anything," she told Maria during their final meeting before the academy training began. Choosing to stay local and build a career from the ground up shows the same kind of character you displayed that night in the building. The police academy experience was dramatically different from Maria's first attempt years earlier. Her instructors treated her with respect from the first day, and her fellow recruits looked to her for leadership and guidance. The woman who had once been dismissed as too small was now seen as someone who had proven that courage and skill mattered more than physical dimensions. Uncle Roberto attended Maria's graduation ceremony, sitting in the front row with tears of pride in his eyes. The gym where she had trained for so many years had become a local landmark, with reporters and documentary filmmakers regularly visiting to understand how a small neighborhood facility had produced someone capable of such extraordinary achievements. During her graduation speech as class valedictorian, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to that moment. "People told me I was too small to be effective in law enforcement," she said, looking out at an audience that included many of the same officials who had once doubted her capabilities. "They laughed at my dreams and questioned my abilities, but they were measuring the wrong things." She paused, thinking about that night in the building when everything had changed. "They were looking at my height instead of my heart, my weight instead of my will, my size instead of my spirit." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "Tonight, I want every person who has ever been told they're not good enough to know that other people's limitations are not your limitations." The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, but Maria was already thinking about her first day on patrol, her first chance to put her training and experience to work in service of her community. The people who had laughed at her were no longer laughing, but more importantly, she had proven to herself that dreams backed by determination could overcome any obstacle. Years later, as Detective Maria Santos walked into her office at the police department's major crimes unit, she would sometimes think about that night in the building that had changed her life. The trophies on her shelf now included commendations for bravery, excellence in investigation, and community service, but they all traced back to those few hours when a small security guard had refused to be intimidated by impossible odds. The criminals she had defeated that night were eventually convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their crime ring dismantled, and their stolen data returned to its rightful owners. But their most significant contribution to society might have been inadvertently providing Maria Santos with the opportunity to prove that heroes come in all sizes, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. Maria's story became required reading at police academies across the country, a reminder that effective law enforcement depends not on physical intimidation, but on intelligence, training, and unwavering commitment to protecting others. She had walked away victorious not just from one night of violence, but from a lifetime of limitations that others had tried to impose on her dreams. The woman they had laughed at had indeed walked away victorious, and in doing so, she had changed not only her own life, but the lives of countless others who would follow in her footsteps. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not just against criminal adversaries, but against the assumptions and prejudices that try to define what's possible for those brave enough to prove them wrong.